The saloon in Big Whiskey, Wyoming, was cloaked in a hush that didn't belong to a room full of men. Rain tapped against the windows, thunder low in the distance, but inside, the silence was thick with fear. The patrons, local cowboys, drifters, and deputies stared, frozen in place as the door slowly creaked open. Dear listeners, before we move forward, please subscribe my channel to hit 1,000 figure. William Money stepped inside, soaked in shadow and rain, a black silhouette outlined by the lamplight. His long coat was dripping wet, his eyes sunken but razor-sharp. The room could smell death before he even raised his voice. At his feet lay Ned's coffin, propped up in the corner like a warning nobody dared read. Money scanned the room, saw the fear in their eyes, the way they didn't reach for their guns. They had heard the rumors that he was once a killer of women and children, a man without mercy, that those days were behind him. Until now, behind the bar, Little Bill Daggett stood, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. He held a hammer and nails, caught mid-act while preparing to board Ned's body into a crate. He squinted, slowly realizing who the soaked figure was. The former lawman-turned-tyrant tried to keep his composure, but his eyes narrowed, wary. "You're William Money," Little Bill said, his voice steady but low. Money didn't answer. He looked at Ned, his old friend now nothing but a lifeless body on display. The rainwater dripped from his hat onto the floorboards, marking time like a funeral march. And then, slow as a predator, Money reached for his shotgun. The moment William Money gripped the shotgun, the room cracked open with panic. Chairs screeched, glasses shook, but no one moved, no one dared. Little Bill straightened, trying to assert the authority he wore like a badge. "You just shot an unarmed man," he growled, defiance flaring in his voice. Money's eyes burned cold. He shifted the shotgun slightly toward the bar. "Well," he said, calm as a hangman's whisper, "he should have armed himself. If he's going to decorate his saloon with my friend." Then, without flinching, he fired. The barkeep was sent flying backwards, the blast echoing like judgment itself. Screams erupted. People ducked behind tables and barrels. The saloon transformed into a war zone with one man holding the battlefield. Little Bill went for his pistol, too slow. Money was already on him. He leveled the shotgun, fired again, and chaos detonated. Smoke filled the air. The scent of gunpowder and blood thickened. A deputy tried to draw, but Money wheeled around and fired, catching him square in the chest. Another man ducked, only to meet the butt of Money's weapon as he lunged forward, switching from gunfire to raw violence. The room emptied of courage. Only Little Bill remained, shot and bleeding, crawling for his rifle. Money advanced, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Anybody don't want to get killed," he barked to the remaining onlookers. "Better clear on out the back." No one questioned him. The saloon emptied in seconds, leaving just the dead, the dying, and the executioner. Little Bill Daggett lay sprawled on the blood-slicked saloon floor, his breath ragged, his face pale with pain and disbelief. The iron taste of blood filled his mouth as he stared up at William Money, this shadow from another life, this ghost of frontier brutality who had come not for justice, but for reckoning. Money's presence was suffocating. He stood tall, a looming figure of judgment, his face expressionless, but his eyes burning with a past he never outran. The shotgun in his hand was nearly empty, but his will was unshaken. Smoke curled from the barrel like a slow exhale from hell itself. "You cowardly bastard," Little Bill rasped, forcing himself to sit upright, though his legs had gone numb. "I don't deserve this." Money took a step forward, each footfall echoing in the silent saloon. He looked down at the man who had paraded Ned's corpse like a message, who had tortured and mocked the code of justice he once swore to uphold. Money's voice came low and cold, like the sound of dirt hitting a coffin lid. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it." That line hung in the air longer than any bullet. It wasn't just a response, it was a death sentence. In those 5 words, Money dismissed the entire myth of moral righteousness that men like Little Bill had used to justify their violence. It wasn't about who was right, who had the badge, who claimed the law. It was about retribution. It was about debt. And Little Bill was bankrupt. The wounded lawman looked up, fear finally cracking through his bravado. "I don't want to die like this." "Not like this." Money cocked the hammer slowly, his fingers steady on the trigger. "I'll see you in hell," Little Bill muttered, still trying to grasp at dignity. "You will," Money replied. The shot was thunder, final, brutal. The bullet slammed into Little Bill's chest, and with a final gasp, the man slumped backward into the void. The sound of his body hitting the floor was soft compared to the violence that had come before, but it was the end. The end of a tyrant, the end of an era. Money stood still, breathing heavily, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of what he'd become again, if only for a moment. The smoke began to settle, curling lazily through the broken air of the saloon. Spent shell casings gleamed on the floor, beside shattered glass and overturned chairs. The silence that followed was deeper than death. It was the silence of men witnessing something ancient, primal, and inescapable. William Money lowered his rifle with the slow gravity of a man not victorious, but burdened. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of lawmen, gunslingers, and liquor-stained legends, none of whom could match what he truly was, a killer whose soul had been forged in blood and loss. He looked once more at Ned's lifeless body resting inside the crude pine coffin. The sight of it made something tighten in his jaw. They had strung his friend up like a warning, hung his body outside in the rain. Not because they feared Ned Logan, but because they wanted to break the idea that any man could stand against them. That was their mistake. Money crossed the floor with slow, deliberate steps. His boots squished softly in the blood pooled beneath the bar. No one tried to stop him. No one moved at all. Even the bartender, hiding behind a stack of whiskey crates, didn't dare peek out. He paused at the door and glanced back over the chaos he'd left. His face didn't show satisfaction or pride. If anything, it showed the weight of having returned to a self he had buried for years. He had come to Big Whiskey not as a gunman, not even as a legend, but as a widowed father, trying to forget the man he once was. And yet, they reminded him what kind of world this still was. He pulled his soaked hat down over his eyes, his voice breaking the silence once more. Not loud, but iron hard. "Anybody takes a shot at me, I'll kill him. And I'll kill his wife. And I'll kill his friends. Burn his damn house down." A few wide-eyed patrons nodded from the shadows, trembling. They understood. The man standing before them wasn't just William Money the outlaw. He was the living truth that no law, no badge, no myth could tame the wild when vengeance came riding through. Then, without another word, he walked back into the rain. The rain had turned the streets of Big Whiskey into rivers of mud and memory. As William Money stepped out of the saloon and into the cold night, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the hills. as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to what had just transpired. His boots sank into the dirt, heavy with blood, water, and years. Each step away from the saloon echoed louder in the night than any gunshot that had ripped through its walls moments earlier. His horse stood waiting where he had left it, as still as a gravestone. Money mounted slowly, his back aching, not just from age, but from the years of violence he thought he had buried with his wife. As she had been his redemption, her love, her faith in him. It had tamed the monster inside, at least for a time. But now she was gone, and tonight that monster had returned. He looked once more toward the town, toward the flickering lanterns behind shuttered windows. He didn't need to see the townsfolk to know what they felt. Fear, awe, shame, maybe even a flicker of gratitude, twisted and uncomfortable. But he wasn't here for their praise. He never would be. The final image of Little Bill gasping for life on the floor haunted him more than it satisfied him. The words still rang in his mind. Deserves got nothing to do with it. And that was the truth. This wasn't justice. This wasn't glory. This was the grim, brutal debt of a life once lived on the edge of hell, and tonight the bill had simply come due. He guided the horse forward, and the animal obeyed without question. No one followed, no one dared. As he vanished into the blackness, the rain washing away the last traces of footprints, only the legend remained. The legend of a man who had once been the devil with a gun, and who, for a brief, terrible moment, had become him again. A man who did not seek forgiveness. A man who knew what he had done. A man who rode alone, into the night, into the unknown, into the silence of history.